and there's a lot of infighting because people who aren't a GNOME user of Fedora, they want to get that name changed to the GNOME edition because it feels it's limiting to the other spins. And
I think the way it's being presented to the downloader, it's being shown as a sidle, as a secondary thing. It doesn't really give equal weights to all the different. But I suppose there is a reason for it, and maybe that's because being Fedora and being Red Hat, maybe they want to kind of standardize instructions and things like that, and give people a more GNOME-centric or more unified set of instructions on how to do things, and maybe KDE could kind of complicate things for them.
Well, from what I've seen, internally Red Hat uses a lot of GTK stuff, so I think that's probably why. If not because they support GNOME. But actually, one of the things I like about KDE over GNOME 3 is the fact that KDE 4, if you have a normal graphics card or whether you have a fancy high-end graphics card, you get the same thing. It doesn't tell you when you run it that it has to revert to classic mode or to a normal shell because your graphics card doesn't handle the things it's trying to introduce.
Yeah, I had it basically detected with 3 drivers out of the box, and I believe this is one of the strengths, or some will say weakness, of Fedora, is the adherence to the 3 drivers, at least by default. And this is one of those sticking points, and I think it's to do also with even the patent issues in the United States. Ubuntu is based mostly in the UK, or not even in the UK to be truthful, it's the Isle of Man, but they don't have the same burden on them when it comes to litigation, either because they're based around the United Kingdom, or because the company which we deal with does not have much of a target on its behind, let's say. It's really not going to be very popular if a company like Canonical was sued, let's say, by a company like, or even by MPLA, whereas if they go after a company that has about $1 billion in annual revenue, like Red Hat, it's going to be seen a bit differently. And I believe this is one of the reasons that Red Hat wants to stick to a set of free drivers, free software. Or maybe that's not the case. Maybe you can enlighten me.
There's a little bit of legal in there, but that's not why it sticks to free software. It's part of the 4 foundations of Fedora, is its commitment to free software. So I think that's the real reason, not completely legal, though I do know that they actually consult Red Hat legal for some of the stuff that they've been adding to Fedora. Like they contact them regarding Mozilla issues even.
Yeah. There is a distribution called, I believe, it used to be Omega, and there was another one that's called, that's actually containing lots of proprietary components out of the box, and it's based on Fedora. Do you know what the situation is with this distribution?
I didn't catch the name. What was it?
There was one, I think was Raul, who was working on Omega quite a few years back. But there was another distribution you mentioned in our last interview.
As far as I know, he still does Omega.
Is he? Okay. Because that contains things like codecs, for example. And what's the name of the other distribution which contains a lot of proprietary software?
The one I know does is Fusion.
Yes, yeah.
And that includes stuff like TeamViewer and things like that. And actually, since we last talked, I have more reasons not to recommend Fusion. It has an extremely slow release process. I think they've finally released 14 last month, or the month before. It's very recent, and 15's almost out. And all they're doing is adding codecs and a few other packages.
Yeah, well, I suppose, how would you compare it to Linux Mint, for example?
I've never used Linux Mint. Probably never used Fusion either. Not that I can recall anyways. From what I've heard, Mint is Ubuntu with all the codecs, and Fusion is Fedora with all the codecs. I'd imagine they'd be pretty close to the same thing, as in what they add to the default distro to make it work with MP3s and videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I heard it actually relates to the news. Red Hat has just had a bit of a meeting where it promoted the whole big hype around, cloud computing, or I call it fog computing myself, but they were talking about the many of the big clients of Red Hat would be companies that deploy servers based on Linux to do services to just run some processes in whatever, Java or PHP.
Yeah.
Things like Facebook even. Things like Google, Facebook, whatever. Lots of the big companies run that. And they increasingly try to market it as a very good tool for companies to get a low cost and very stable environment in which to run applications, to run web services. One of the things that I found also in this conference is that they were talking about something to do with thin clients and actually returning to a semi-functional desktop that relies upon a server somewhere. And I think this is one of the strategies they have for, I would say, returning to the desktop or returning to pursuing it on a commercial basis, not just a maintenance of a Fedora distribution that's downloadable, but actually something that they'll try to push into businesses. Do you know anything about that?
About thin clients?
About Red Hat's commitment to a should we call it solution for a business on a desktop. I know they have quite a few clients in places like Hollywood, where people do work on machines running all kinds of proprietary applications and requiring quite a basically requiring also good access to the back end, things like rendering farms, and so quite a few of them would use something like Red Hat replacing all kinds of Unix-based platforms, things like Solaris before that. So I do know that they have some clients that use Red Hat Enterprise to basically do their work on a desktop. But I just wondered if you could expand on the use of Fedora, perhaps also in large, for example, I know NASA used to be using Fedora. Do you know if that's still the case?
I don't know for sure, actually.
Is there any case of not a success story or not exactly a case study or something, but do you know of any major users of Fedora? I mean, I can think of a few of them, but any major users who actually choose Fedora as their desktop to run things on?
I can't think of any names that come to mind, actually. I hadn't really...
Some of them are based on Fedora, I believe. There was this distribution called Limpus. I think they did rename it to something like Linplus or something, because they didn't realize that Pass is not a very good word to use if you try to market this distribution, but that was targeting things like sub-notebooks or netbooks at one stage. And I do know that Fedora actually contributes quite a good deal when it comes to writing code and writing new packages and working quite closely with the kernel, because Reddit has quite a few of those developers. And one of the points I was not pushing too much in the interview with Jonah Bacon was it seems to me something like Canonical works on quite a few projects, but all of them in the end serve the Ubuntu distribution. So even when they work with people who work on things like Axor and Compiz, it's supposed to be beneficial to the Canonical only, or the Canonical owned, in terms of copyrights, owned by Canonical software. I don't sense as though there is commitment to the stack as a whole in quite a few of the companies that I don't really want to name companies. I think it's just going to be offensive to some groups or developers. But I think that we had this discussion before. I personally believe in supporting Fedora because I do know to what extent they work on the GNOME shell, for example. I believe about 80% of the contributions in terms of patches or stuff came from people who are associated with Red Hat or with Fedora.
Yeah.
One of the things one of the things that I would